All right, ladies and gentlemen, we might, even though there are a few more still coming in, we might get on the road. Thank you very much for coming to a session that I hope will be uplifting, but I dare say could prophesy the end of the world. Artificial intelligence, robotics, the future of work, these are very, very deep topics. And luckily for us, we have a world-renowned AI expert to talk us through that, Toby Walsh. I'll introduce him more fully in a moment. Set the scene just so you have the poll and the question app ready to rock and roll on your phones. We're going to put up our polling question, and the question will appear in a moment. When will computers be as intelligent as humans? It already happened, maybe. 2022, end of some fund's next 3-year plan, okay. 2042, 2062, 2082. There is a right answer. All right, but while you are tapping away, we'll get a live feed on the screen in a second. I'm going to introduce our guest speaker, Toby Walsh. Oh, here we go. We'll just read this. They already are. Seriously? Anyone at the thing last night where the guy said, "I'll believe that when my computer can talk to my printer"? I thought that was very compelling. 2042, 2022. 2082, no. You're waiting. All right, fantastic. Well, now I would like to introduce Toby Walsh. He has the best, I'm nominating him for the best bio of the Country Music Super Festival. He, first of all, he is a Professor of Artificial Intelligence. Isn't that the best title? That is awesome. The media call him a rock star of the digital revolution. He's also an author, he's a TED talker, he's a consultant, and he's a passionate advocate for the limits on artificial intelligence. We'd like to welcome him here today. Toby Walsh.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Well, that was a great question to start with, because actually the title of my new book is the answer to the question. It's entitled 2062, and that's when I surveyed 300 of my colleagues, other people working in AI, that's when they thought. There's huge uncertainty in their answers, but on average they said 2062. And just like you, I also surveyed the public, and they thought machines were coming much sooner than they are. But we want to talk today about some, I think really one of the most fundamental, important conversations that we should be having. One that is really pertinent to this industry, which is about AI and the very future of work. Now, I think for most people started to wake up to the idea that AI was taking over parts of our lives about 3 or 4 years ago, when we saw that the ancient Chinese game of Go could be played by computers better than humans. That was really a landmark moment. Don't take my word for it. The New York Times had said 20 years earlier, in 1997, when Garry Kasparov, the world chess champion, was beaten by IBM's Deep Blue, a computer, that it's okay. In a consoling article they wrote, well, it's all right, humankind. We're not yet succeeding at artificial intelligence. We won't succeed till we can solve the much more challenging game of Go. It's the oldest board game on the planet, pretty much. It's been playing it for a couple of thousand years. And it's way more complex than chess. There are actually more games of Go than atoms in the universe. And so it was pretty much a landmark moment when humans were no longer as good as machines at playing that strategy game. And it really begs the question, what else are the machines going to do? And is there going to be any work left for the rest of us? That's a question that economists have been asking, some of the most famous economists on the planet. Here's a quote from one of them, talking about the threat that may pose to the very nature of work. There's a new disease of which some readers may not have heard the name, but of which they will hear a great deal for years to come, namely technological unemployment. Now, some of you might recognize that was John Maynard Keynes. That was in 1930. And he was wrong. working. Employment levels are at historical low levels, 4 or 5%, most developed countries around the world. Populations are at historic high levels. And so we've created lots of new jobs, despite the fear that automation was bringing back then, and all of the stuff that computers do today. We have somehow created many more jobs than have been destroyed by technology. There has been quite a bit of disruption, but nevertheless, those fears are wrong. But that doesn't mean, of course, that those fears won't appear again in the future, because we do seem to be going through another step change in the nature of what computers can do. And there are certain things that machines are going to do very soon where maybe humans only used to do. So one of them is driving. This is Uber's autonomous taxi. And I do wonder in 20 years' time whether we will be paying people to drive anymore, because it's going to be far cheaper and far safer to have machines do that. And we already have that. In Australia, here in Australia, 5 of Rio Tinto's mines, the big trucks, dumpster trucks that drive around, are fully autonomous. That's where, of course, the autonomous trucks are going to turn up to begin with, because we can control the environment. You can control who goes into the mine, where everyone goes. And it's going to take a little bit longer, but it will happen that we'll have autonomous trucks on our roads, autonomous taxis on our roads. And so are we going to be employing people to drive those anymore? But there's lots of other ways. Here's a picture of Sydney Airport from my journey up here. We used to have a line of people who would check you in and weigh your bags. Well, now we have robots. These are robots. A robot is something that can sense the world, reason about the world, and act. This can sense the world. It can see, weigh your bag. It can reason about whether you're paid for luggage or not, or you're overweight. And it can act. It can turn the conveyor belt on or call for someone to come and have a look at your flight. So those are robots that are taking over jobs that humans used to do. Here's another one. This is a hotel I stayed at recently. You can see professors, they get to stay at very good quality hotels. But again, people used to do these jobs, and now we've got machines doing them. And so people are understandably thinking, well, where is this all going to end? What's going to be left? If the machines can do not just the manual things, the things our muscles used to do, but the things our brains used to do, what's going to be left for us? And so there's been some very worrying studies, mostly done by economists, not by people who understand the technology like myself, making some dire predictions about where they're going to go. Most famous was a study back in 2013 by some people in the University of Economists at the University of Oxford, who made this prediction that 47% of jobs are at risk of automation in the next 2 decades in the US. There's a slight irony. They used machine learning. They used some AI to make the prediction. So the job of predicting whose jobs are being automated has already been automated. And a similar study was done. Some colleagues of mine did it for Australia, came up with very similar numbers, 45% of jobs, 30% of tasks, and half of all jobs already, and many of the lower and jobs in the middle might be most at risk. Now, I'm a scientist. I've looked closely at some of the data, and I can assure you some of the predictions are just completely false. So here's one of the predictions. One of the predictions with the most confidence, 98% certainty, was that bicycle repair person was going to be automated in the next 2 decades. Now, I can give you 3 good reasons why that prediction is just never going to happen. First of all, I've asked all of my colleagues around the world. None of them are working on bicycle repair robots. Secondly, I was repairing my bike this weekend, and anyone who's done a bicycle repair will know it's a difficult, fiddly job. And unfortunately, bicycle repair people are not well paid. Eventually, we might be able to build a robot to do those sorts of things, but it's going to be a very expensive robot, and we're not going to pay a very expensive robot to do what people who sadly weren't very well paid used to do. So it just doesn't make economic sense. And thirdly, a friend of mine owns a bicycle shop, and I was telling her about this, and she said, but we lose money repairing bicycles. I said, so why is it then that you repair bicycles? She said, well, it was to get people in the shop. It's to build a relationship with them. It's to sell them a bit of kit. Eventually, it's to sell them the next bicycle. We're social people. That's a job that we're going to do for other people. It's not a job for robots. Another prediction, with 95% probability, was model. Now, we can't build robots that can walk in high heels. I believe that's quite a challenging task. We can build robots that can walk down a catwalk, but we don't care what robots look like in clothes. We care what people look like in clothes. So we may be able to get a robot to do it, we're just not going to choose. Now, there's lots of jobs that we'll just prefer humans to do, or we won't decide to get robots to do. And of course, all these studies don't factor in all the jobs that will be created. 20 years ago, no one was a social media promoter, no one was a smartphone app developer, because we didn't have social media, we didn't have smartphones. There's all jobs been invented for these new technologies. And equally, in 20 years' time, we'll all be doing jobs with technologies that were invented in 10 years' time. So it's hard to know what those are going to be. And it's hard to know what the balance is going to be. And any economist who tries to persuade you they have any idea is completely fooling you. Of course, just because in the past we created more jobs than we destroyed doesn't mean that's going to be in the future. But there was certainly, we have to factor in that into account. And there's lots of other things that need to be taken into account that many of you worry about. The changing demographics, that we're all living longer and spending more time retired. In fact, one of my colleagues, Rodney Brooks, is one of the most famous roboticists on the planet, Australian, he works at MIT. He reckons, in fact, the robot's only going to arrive just in time to deal with the fact that we're all going to be retired. We're going to have someone to do all that work. But whilst I've, trying to be a little optimistic, there are not without the challenges that face us. And if you were constructing a time in history where you go through this technological disruption, you wouldn't, if you had any choice, throw in all the other things that are happening on our planet today. Climate change and all the disruption, economic turmoil that's going to bring to our lives, the ongoing, no doubt, never-ending global financial crisis, increasing inequality. This graphic applies to all of these things, right? The way that we're destroying the planet in one way or the other. You wouldn't throw all those into the same pot as you're putting in this technological disruption into our lives. And there certainly are, to listen to my economist friends in the academy, there certainly are some worrying trends happening at the same time. I think this is probably the most worrying graph I've ever seen, which is a graph of two things. One is increasing productivity. Almost a linear increase in productivity over the last 50 years, ever since the end of the war. The amazing wealth that's created, the prosperity, and especially in a lucky country like here in Australia, uninterrupted, pretty much, even despite all the financial crises and booms and busts that we see in the world's economy, pretty much uninterrupted growth driven by technology, most of that driven by computing, and increasingly today, much of that being driven by things like AI and automation. And everything is good with wages. This is median wages in the US, similar graphs for median wages in Australia. Everything looks really good. It tracks median wages. The red graph tracks productivity up to the middle of the 70s. And then there's a really worrying disconnect. That productivity continues to increase through the oil crisis, through the 80s and 90s, all that good music. And then wages, median wages, do not just flatline. This is what inflation-adjusted median wages have just flatlined, essentially. And that, is partly probably why, many of us are feeling left behind. Many of us have to work longer hours to earn, to see some of those returns in productivity. So those are worrying trends. There's a similar worrying trend a little bit later. If you see, again, this graph is productivity, but now the red line is not median wages, but total private employment outside of the government sector. This, again, is for the US, but similar graph for Australia. And you see, at the dot-com crash, you see that employment started to halt, productivity carried on, and as the economy started to grow again, private employment at least, didn't start to pick up again. Those jobs were perhaps now being more and more automated. So there are some worrying trends, and those are happening here in Australia. So last year, the end of last year, NAB, as an example, announced record profits and that they were going to lay off 6,000 staff due to digitalization. And they were going to hire 2,000 people with the right appropriate skills. So these are things that are not happening in 2062 or 2042. These are things that are happening to employment today. We are seeing some of the changes, some of the disruption happen today. The jobs are changing for sure. And it's easy to see what the primary consequences are. We already discussed some of those. Maybe if we're going to have autonomous cars and autonomous trucks, we're going to have fewer taxi drivers, fewer Uber drivers, fewer truck drivers, because machines will do that far cheaper and far easier. But it's worth thinking about the secondary consequences. Those actually tend to often be more disruptive. So, as an example, if I had money to buy shares, I would not be buying shares in construction companies and real estate companies that own car parks. Because if cars are autonomous, they don't have to sit there and wait for you anymore. We don't need all the parking that we used to have, because they can go off and do useful things. They can go and earn money as a taxi for you. And if you look out on the streets today, 30% of our streets are used for parking cars. So suddenly our streets are going to be opened up, freed up. 95% of the time, your car, the second most expensive thing that most of us buy after our cars, your car's sitting slowly rusting on the side of the road because it has to wait for you. It can't do anything else till you're ready to go to your next destination. But now it can go and do something useful. So maybe many of us won't even own cars, and we'll actually just rent time in some sort of super Uber app. So it's those consequences, those secondary consequences. If you think about it, the modern automobile, in some sense, helped us define the modern city. And the autonomous vehicle will completely change that equation about how we design our cities, how the cities work, as another example. At the moment, people don't want to spend a long time commuting in cars because that's wasted time. But many car manufacturers now are actually prototyping the idea that maybe they should design office spaces in cars, because you can use that time. If the car's driving itself, you can use that time, the first hour of your day, to answer your emails, get on top of your work, so that first hour is no longer wasted. And so now there's a secondary or a tertiary consequence, which is that maybe we'll be prepared to live further apart from where we used to work. So maybe, you should be buying shares in real estate companies, in the real estate companies in the city, in the suburbs and in the country, because now people will be more prepared to live in those places, which also solves the other problem, which is none of us can afford to buy houses in cities anymore because of the asset price inflation that low interest rates has given there. So those are the things those interesting things that we need to think through. As another example, insurance. I'm not sure that I would want my super being invested in car insurance companies for much longer, because, well, if cars aren't having accidents, if the autonomous cars are so much safer, isn't that going to impact quite severely on that industry? Well, it's good news for most of us. 1,000 people who die in road traffic accidents every year in Australia, those numbers are going to go close to zero once we have autonomous cars. But if you are a car insurance company, maybe a lot of your livelihood is going to disappear because cars are going to be so much safer, there's going to be so much fewer accidents, insurance rates should consequently drop significantly. So there's a huge amount of uncertainty as to what's going to happen, but it's certainly going to be a disruptive period. But there's one thing that I think we're pretty confident about, is that the new jobs that get created, the new jobs that we'll be transitioning to, will require different skills to the old jobs. And so one thing is for certain, is that education is going to be absolutely critical. We're going to have to support people throughout their careers, because in 20 years' time, you'll be using technologies that have yet to be invented. And numbers today, and people talk about young people going into the workforce today will have a dozen different careers, jobs throughout their course of their life. How do we support people? How do we support people? And again, this is an issue for the super industry. You're going to expect, people to be moving around a lot more because jobs, jobs aren't jobs for life anymore. Jobs will be changing that much more rapidly. I do have a little bit of personal advice for you. What are the skills that you should have? What are the skills you should be developing now to make yourself future-proof against the arrival of the robots? And I've got a suitable aid memoir here. It's a triangle. Don't get caught in the middle where the robots will be taking the jobs. Be at one of the corners of the triangle. If you're a geek like me, be at the top of the triangle. Be someone who's inventing the future. There's a future inventing the future. Be involved in technology. That's going to be a pretty good place to be. But not all, everyone's a geek, so don't worry, there are two other corners of the triangle where there are plentiful jobs, and I cannot see machines taking over anytime soon. That's the left-hand corner of the triangle for people with good emotional intelligence, social intelligence, people skills. Being a salesperson, being a psychologist, being a politician, being a CEO, all of the jobs that I'm told require good emotional intelligence, social intelligence. And then the final corner of the triangle is for the artistic and the artisan. Machines are not creative. Maybe they will be a little bit more in the future, but even if they are, we care about what humans make. We're already seeing this in hipster culture, the rise of artisan bread and handmade clothes and all these things that aren't mass-produced, that we can actually tell a story about, that the human hand has touched. The potential is huge. The numbers have been put by PwC and various other consultants. It's going to increase the world's economy in inflation-adjusted terms by 2030 by $17 trillion in GDP. Now, you guys did know lots about thinking in millions, and some of you even in billions, but trillions aren't numbers that we can think about very easily. So I've got a simple picture that will make it easy for you. It's another continent. The GDP today of China and the GDP of India add up almost exactly to $15 or $16 trillion, which is about what the economists estimate is going to be the return of AI. So it's like we discovered another continent. Last time we discovered another continent was pretty big news. It pretty much changed the world in a very significant way. So it is going to be big news. The benefits are not going to be evenly spread. They're not going to be evenly spread between countries. It's estimated that some countries like China are going to see much greater returns, 25%, more than 25% on their GDP. A country like here, we can expect 10 or 15%. But 10 or 15% is probably half the economic growth we can expect by 2030 in total. So that's a big deal. It's a big deal of where we're going to see continuing growth. And if you look within businesses, and this next infographic is one of the most interesting, I think. I certainly learned a lot by looking at this, is it's not going to happen, certainly to begin with, uniformly within a business, uniformly in businesses. This infographic, the size of the area of the squares, the rectangles, are proportional to the impact it's going to have on a business. And you see almost half of the graph is marketing and sales. And that's something you already know, because actually, it's to quote William Gibson, the future's already here, it's just unevenly spread. We already see in the really technically minded companies like Amazon, that they're already using AI in a significant way, companies like Netflix, to really change the way they do marketing, to make it much more personalized, to understand with data their customers. And equally, that's a take home for you guys, which is, where is it going to have the most impact perhaps on a super fund in its operations? It is in understanding your members and being able to target things that they would want and understand them better, just as, the companies that are already ahead of the curve with the technology like Amazon and Netflix, who really understand their customers, are using the AI today. The other big boxes are in terms of operations, perhaps less pertinent to this audience, but in terms of how you run the business, how you run your warehouses, how you run your distribution networks, these sorts of things where you can again get the AI to make some important decisions for you that humans used to not do as well. And things in the C-suite tend to be much further. It's much more at the operational level than the strategic level. Things in the C-suite are things that we're much further away from, perhaps 20 or 30 years, from being able to give you really good tools that can help you do that. It's worth thinking about what we can learn from history here. This isn't the first revolution in the way that we work that we've been through, and of course, we have the first industrial revolution that really was, a fantastic change in the way that we worked. Before the industrial revolution, most of the population was out in the fields, farming, providing food to feed us. And now most of those jobs have changed 3% of the population is involved in agriculture. Many new jobs were invented in factories and offices that have lifted the quality of our lives. And it's worth remembering. I mean, I'm trying to give you some optimism, despite the pessimism from my chair here, that we live much better quality lives now. Life expectancy here in Australia has almost doubled since the first Industrial Revolution. We have used that prosperity to lift the quality of our lives. We've shared many of those benefits around, but that didn't happen. And this is something we have to think carefully about what we can learn from history. That didn't happen without some disruption. We certainly did have at one time the robber barons. We did make some pretty significant structural changes to our society. We introduced unions, introduced labor laws. We introduced the welfare state, so that if you were out of work, you weren't in the poorhouse. We introduced universal education, so that people were educated for those new jobs. So we made some pretty significant changes to make sure that people like Marx were wrong, that the prosperity wasn't just owned by the owners of the factories, but was shared by all of us. And I do think maybe we have to think also that we're going through another period of significant disruption. And then one difference that will happen than the last one is that this one's going to happen quicker. The Industrial Revolution began in the north of England and spread over the world in a course of 50-odd years. You had to invest in expensive steam engine equipment. This one's going to happen overnight, because you can write a piece of code, you can copy it and send it around the world overnight. And there were, let's not forget, significant periods of pain and disruption. We went through the General Strike, the Great Depression, 2 world wars as well. So it wasn't without the pain, and it did take quite a while before the quality of people's lives did pick up, and now is significantly better. Our median income is significantly, 3 or 4 times inflation adjusted, improved as to what it was 100 years ago. So these are really important questions, and I really was happy to come and help you think through the changes that we're going through. It is going to be a really interesting period of change, and hopefully we will come out of it with better quality lives, and so that our grandchildren experience what we did, which was better quality lives than our grandparents. If you want to know more, the answer to the poll is 2062. We've still got a long way to go to build machines as capable, but we can already do interesting things with machines, even the not very smart machines that we have today, that should be changing the nature of work for your members and the nature of your work for yourselves. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thanks, Toby. That's great. So the AXA Investment Managers Live Q&A app is open, and we have a number of questions from the audience. We'll start there, and I'll seed some of my own in as we go. I'm assuming these are from the audience, or else the machine's been tapped. And someone, supposedly known as David, has asked, why is it artificial intelligence? It's not actually artificial, is it?
That's a really good question. It was a name invented by John McCarthy in 1956 for a conference, and it's a name that many of us have misgivings about. It's not perhaps the best name for the field, but it's a name that stuck, and for better or for worse, we have it. And most people focus on the I, the intelligence, thinking we are trying to build ultimately machines that can do things that when humans do them, we think they require intelligence. Your chatbot is a little AI that's understanding language. That requires a little bit of intelligence and responding. Siri is another example of a little AI that understands speech, turns that into text, looks up the answer in Google, reads back an answer. But we don't normally spend much time thinking about the A, the artificial. And actually, I think although many of us have misgivings about the name, and maybe it should be called cybernetics or informatics or just super duper computing. The artificial is actually quite important, because one thing that we are discovering is that it might be quite a different type of intelligence to our human intelligence. And certainly that's one of the important things, if you start little projects using AI in your business to for example, to market to your customers, is that we're discovering that it can, for example, break in quite different ways to humans. It doesn't have any of our common sense. We have, for example, computer vision systems. You can change one pixel and they can turn a stop sign into a go sign. Humans would never make those mistakes. And so a good example I give to people is maybe the best thing is to think like it's like flight. We fly around the world now better than birds do in aeroplanes. That's artificial flight. We solve that problem of flying through the air, heavier objects flying through the air, in a completely different way than birds do. We don't flap. Aeroplanes don't flap their wings and fly at the speeds of birds. They came up with a different solution, fixed wing with a very big engine, that actually is a much more effective way of flying, much faster, much quicker. We fly around the world today much further and faster than birds can fly. It's the same fundamental laws of aerodynamics that are governing both birds and planes, but we've solved them in a very different way, and we still don't really understand how birds fly. We don't really understand the aerodynamics of feathers. If we were trying to build planes like birds, we would probably still be sitting at the end of the runway flapping our hands. And so, AI is, in some sense, a very different way of trying to get computers to do things that humans do that require some intelligence.
I think just that answer makes me think of my daughter doesn't believe in trivia quizzes. She doesn't believe in general knowledge. She says, I'll just look it up on my phone. Why do I need to know that? So she regards my intelligence as superficial intelligence, not artificial intelligence. But where does knowledge go, right? What happens to knowledge?
That's a great question. Well, I mean, first of all, it highlights how the younger generation always has a healthy disrespect. My daughter as well.
My daughter's very healthy.
Which is how we can have great confidence that we'll continue to progress as a species because they'll ignore everything, all the bad advice we give them, and go off and discover great new things for themselves. We do have AI does solve general knowledge questions. There was an IBM program that won $1 million playing Jeopardy a few years back. It's far better than humans at answering questions, although actually to tone down IBM's claims about the success, it was pretty good at answering the general knowledge questions. It was pretty much comparable to the humans, but actually it won because it was much better at betting. Because you could actually nominate a sum if you weren't sure about the answer. The questions were somewhat ambiguous, and it could do probabilities much better than humans. So it won because it would make much better, much more strategic bets, and so quickly outwon the humans. But yes, it will change the nature of us. There's lots of things that we will outsource to machines. Most of the things that weren't particularly useful for us. I mean, you and I are the last generation that know how to subtract. We're probably the last generation that knows how to use a map. We'll be the last generation. I have a bet with my daughter. We're the last generation that will know how to drive. I have a bet with my daughter. When I took the bet out, she was 8, she's 9 now, that she will never learn to drive. Because in 10 years' time, it will be so much easier, cheaper. I'll be so much more confident that she's not being driven around by one of her drunk friends if she uses a Super Uber app. So it's expensive, difficult, as it should be, to learn to drive. She will never learn to drive. So that's one of those skills that will leave us. The interesting question is, how does that change us as humans? They've done studies with people, with taxi drivers in London, when they do the knowledge, the year-long test you have to do to become a black cab driver. And you can physically measure the changes in the frontal cortex of the brain. The brain actually grows in size in the map reading, map storing, map reasoning part of the brain. So reading maps literally changes your brain. So if we don't read maps, our brains will be different. They'll have time to do other things, but that part of our brains will be different. And if the internet's down or Google Maps is not working, maybe we're going to be lost a lot more. So it's interesting to think. Technologies always give us things new. They give us new things, but they also take other things away. So, the interesting thing is to ask the question, technology is going to take away the need to remember general knowledge, the need to read maps. What are they going to give us back? And it's an interesting thing.
There's a question on the iPad here, which is just frozen. So no, I'm kidding. How do you predict AI and automation will affect the mental health of the workforce?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. That's the question we really should be thinking about, and we need to think about it today, because already there are significant employees whose boss is an algorithm. So if you work for Uber, if you work for Deliveroo, if you work for many companies these days, the person giving you the work is not a person anymore, it's a computer. And that has consequences, because computers don't have empathy or any understanding of what makes people tick today, at least. And there may be, even if we set out to write the algorithms in a way that's responsible and fair and careful, we can end up in unexpected feedback loops. So there was some recent studies that showed that Uber is sexist. Well, there's so many things to criticize about Uber, but Uber pays male drivers more than women drivers. Not because they intended, not because the techies in Silicon Valley writing the algorithms that farm out the work to people, assign jobs to people, intended that they wanted to give less money to women for driving Uber drives. But it turns out the way the systems is designed and the way those algorithms work within Uber, it pays men more than women. It pays men more than women for a couple of reasons. First of all, because it pays men to speed. So it pays men to break the law, because if there's nothing in the pricing that discourages you from speeding, and if you speed, you get to your destination quicker, you get another job quicker, so you earn more money. So it's encouraging people to break the law, to drive more dangerously, and that tends to be men. And secondly, it gives jobs, men are more prepared to take jobs for a variety of reasons in red light districts and places where people drink late at night, and they then get more valuable rights. And so women are being penalized because they value their safety more. So that was never intended. I'm sure the people behind Uber never intended to say, well, we want to discriminate against women. But because you hand those decisions over to machines who don't understand these things, can see through the consequences, you end up in these places, and will encourage people to take on the way it encourages you to stay there and hit your targets and get the bonuses again. That may be not good for your mental health. That may be good for your well-being, and so we have to be really careful that we don't wake up in one of these dystopian worlds that authors like Huxley and Orwell have told us about, where the algorithms are making all the choices, and it is not actually helping our well-being and our mental health.
That'll be so much better, because politics isn't broken, the media's not broken, financial services isn't broken.
No.
We don't want the artificial intelligence taking over. Things would get much worse.
No, they would. Well, although I will tell you, some colleagues of mine took all of Trump's tweets, right, because he does a lot of tweets, and they trained a bot on his tweets. So you can train a bot to sound like someone. And there's this thing called Deep Drumpf. Drumpf is the German original family name for Trump. And this thing, you can look him up you can look the bot up on the internet. This thing is indistinguishable from Trump. I mean, I know it's not a high bar, but we can already simulate Trump. So it's only a matter of time before those other politicians get replaced.
So turn it to super just for a second. A few years ago, I was over in Silicon Valley at a place, Singularity University,
Yes.
and they're big believers in the singularity, and also the exponential growth of the improvements in everything from medicine and the like. And they said that the first 1,000-year-old person has been born, which is very disturbing for someone in superannuation. So I wanted to just bring this back to business cases for super. I think if I'm looking at the market at the moment, the sort of most successful close to artificial intelligence business cases probably in the investment space. Bridgewater are very good at guiding their returns through artificial intelligence. But I'm also thinking of your bike factory there, that's a lot of those business cases that we think will happen probably never will. Where do you think there might be some good business cases for us to go and explore that relate to artificial intelligence?
Well, of course, I mean, AI is being driven by data. Probably the field that is actually surprisingly poor at using data and matters to us all more than anything is health. And we are just starting to think about, well, how can we start collecting that data? I know the government completely messed up with my health, but increasingly we will be collecting that data. And one of the challenges there is that we treat people's privacy here in this country and in the US even with a lot of appropriate respect. And that actually puts us at a significant disadvantage compared to countries like China, where they have not only a huge, great population, but much different attitude towards privacy and collection of data. And I've already seen a number of cases where they're developing health apps, they're developing radiology programs to read x-rays better than human doctors can do it, cheaper, quicker, faster, more accurately than human doctors, because they have data sets in China that just we would dream about having here. But there is a huge, great potential for making health much more appropriate for the individual. Your doctor, you don't realize, when you go to see a doctor, he or she says the same thing to everyone, really, pretty much. I mean, that's medicine. It's still stuck 200 years ago where everyone gets the same advice. And increasingly, we're going to have the genetic information, we're going to have the data on large cohorts of people and how those genes interact with the environment to be able to make much more personalized decisions so that you get the right medicine, that you actually could hopefully live not only a longer life, but a better quality life. It's not just about living longer, it's about actually, in those final decades of your life, having the health to enjoy it. And AI is one of the technologies that will help us do it, because you'll be able to look at data sets that humans cannot possibly look at. I mean, that's one of the reasons why AI will ultimately help us make better decisions, is not necessarily because it's going to be smarter than us, but because it can look at data sets that human eyes possibly couldn't look at. I mean, that was the reason that AlphaGo got to be better at Go, because it played more games of Go than a human possibly could do in a lifetime. And machines just have that advantage. They work faster, quicker, they can work in parallel, they can just see more data than humans possibly ever can. And so even if their decision-making isn't better than humans, the fact that they can just be more comprehensive gives them an edge over us.
So that leads in very nicely. I think this is the first question, is most popular question on the app at the moment, is straight out of Cyberdyne Systems or Skynet. But for those of us who are hoping to still be here in 2062, come on, have a bit of optimism. Should we be concerned that a more intelligent digital species might set out to make us extinct?
Okay, I've got to tell you one other secret about 2062. So I told you the technical reason why the book was called 2062. I discovered after I'd finished the book and when it was being printed, so too late to change it, I was explaining what the book's about, and I think this is one of the most important messages in the book. The book is about the fact that we need to make some important choices about how we run our society, how we structure work, so that 2062 is going to be a good world. And I was telling my daughter about the book. I said, well, it's sort of the world you're going to inherit. The book about the choices we make now today, about the world you're going to inherit. And then I did the maths. This is the question about whether we'll be here or not. And she will be exactly my age in 2062. It's rather spooky. But the question is, no, the machines aren't going to take over. Please, sleep easy tonight. Machines have no consciousness, no desires of their own. They just do what we tell them to do. And that normally is the problem. We haven't thought carefully through what we tell them to do. And anyone who, like myself, has had the pleasure of programming a computer knows how frustratingly literal they are. They do everything you tell them to do, however stupid that is. And it's actually the stupidity of machines I'm much more worried about than the smartness of machines, that will be giving machines the right to make decisions that decide, who gets welfare, what insurance rates people pay, what premiums you pay, and they have no common sense. So it's the stupidity of machines, and they certainly are not going to rise up and take over the planet anytime soon.
I'm glad you bring that up, because back to Super for a second and chatbots. Now, HESTA's got obviously a market-leading chatbot, but it frustrates me from time to time. It might be a little on the stupid side from
Yes.
time to... Can we cut that out of the video? Why is that? It's powered by Google.ai. It should be really good.
Yeah, well, it shows, why it's 2062, why there's another 40-odd years before we can get machines that really understand language. So these are all statistical tools. They've got a very surface-level understanding of the language. They don't understand the meaning in any way at all, and they don't understand the context. They don't remember what you said 2 sentences ago. They just answer the one question you have today that you've just typed in. They don't have our deep understanding. So as I was telling you earlier, if you type into Google Translate, "he was pregnant," it will translate that away into German or French. It won't stop for a second and think, as all of you did, well, there's something fundamentally wrong with that sentence. I mean, he's don't get pregnant. So, how can you say he was pregnant? Because it doesn't. It just understands the statistics of, well, pregnant normally is this word in German, and doesn't really understand. And that's why we've got such a way. But there's a lot you can do with statistics. You can actually answer, the simple queries as, how do I get my password reset? How do I get this form sent to me? Many of your members will be asking very similar questions, and many of them will prefer to interact with that than a pesky human.
Yeah, indeed. Last question off the app. With the singularity upon us, what is our ethical responsibility when it comes to AI?
Great. I'm very pleased that we're ending on ethics, because as I hinted at by talking about Uber and your boss being an algorithm, there's already things that we can do that will challenge our fundamental assumptions in our society about fairness, about privacy, and you can do it at a scale, you can do it at a speed, you can do things that just weren't humanly possible, and you have to think carefully through whether that's the right thing or not. And there's lots of examples already starting to trouble us. I get phoned up almost every day by the media and asked questions about the latest fails, often even of the tech companies who should understand this technology, about how they're misusing the technology in a way that troubles people's values. And clearly you're in a business where you know a lot about your members, and that carries a weight of responsibility to do the right thing and to put their interests right center. Obviously we don't want to end up with more royal commissions saying nasty things about people. We want people to respect the decisions being made for them, that they're put front and center of the decision making, and AI does not absolve you. In fact, AI forces you to take that responsibility, because algorithms, machines can't be held accountable. It's the people who are behind them, who developed them, who fielded them, who need to be held accountable.
Very good. I'm just giving myself a reminder for 2061 to send someone back in time to take out Elon Musk. All right. That is all we've got time for. We'll thank Toby in a second, but if you have more questions, Toby's going to be heading around to the Learning Lab to answer more questions straight after this. And I imagine there'd be a lot of people with more questions. If, however, your questions have been sated, the Plenary 5 is going to take place in Arena 1, back around the corner straight after this. So a huge thanks, Toby. That was just fabulous, thought-provoking, and we'll dwell on that for many, many years. Thank you.
Thank you.